think it's going. It says recording at the top. Do you see recording?
I do.
Cool.
My name is Bradley Powell, and I'm a writer-director living here in Chicago. Um, I've been here for about 5 years, and I'm joined by
Curtis Matzke. I'm a writer-director as well, but I also produce and shoot and do some other things. And I've been in Chicago for about a little over 6 years now. So, yeah.
Great. So the reason why Curtis and I are talking today is that we wanted to experiment with a series of dialogues between colleagues in the Chicago filmmaking community. What we would really like to start to see is more collaboration, more awareness of one another, and a focus more on what we're all here to do, which is filmmaking, the work. Curtis and I looked around and thought that it might be a good idea to actually start conversations between filmmakers and actually interrogate one another in terms of, like, very basically, how do you go about doing what you do? Because all those little tips and tricks can be of tremendous use for any of us or any people who are, thinking about getting into filmmaking. And oftentimes we kind of work in our own silos and corners and aren't aware of what's going on with everybody else. And it makes the whole process, hidden when it doesn't need to be. And so in the spirit of collaboration and of cross-pollination, we're here. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Curtis.
No, absolutely. I think it is funny how like spread out Chicago is as a city. So like you get different groups in like the film community, and I think this is like you and I, Bradley, have been like friends for like a couple years, but we haven't like always talked in depth about our different like filmmaking processes and how we each respectively do it. So this is kind of a good excuse to get friends, collaborators to just open up and like ask any questions that you may have had but never had an opportunity to ask for, because you're normally just talking about whatever other random movie stuff, but less the nitty gritty. So
Absolutely. Let's start at the beginning. Tell me a little bit about how you develop your ideas. Where do they tend to come from? How do you know a good idea from a bad idea? When
good
do
question.
you get stuck, and when do you get excited? And go
Just
anywhere with that you want.
starting off with like 10 questions, Bradley, but
Well, I'm throwing them all at you, and you can just kind of pick and choose.
I mean, I tend to kind of like try and be as open whenever I can to ideas. I don't like limit myself kind of in like what I'm interested in. Like I don't limit myself to like genre whenever I write, for example. I'm just like it's like whatever I'm drawn to at the time.
Sure.
But I think I do get some good kind of inspiration from or ideas from like my brother sometimes has good ideas, and sometimes they'll be like, oh, you do movies, here's like a movie idea. And at first I'm like, that's stupid, but then I'm like, crap, it is a good idea. So then and then I think of it like differently, less so with other family members can be.
And he's not a filmmaker?
He's
Or
not a
he is?
filmmaker, but he has kind of like a humanities kind of arts
Okay.
background. Yeah, no actual like film affiliation. But my last project, like I kind of came up like the orchestra project, kind of came up with that initial idea with him just because I saw a random woman walking on the street with like an instrument case, and that sparked an idea for this horror movie.
Okay.
But yeah, other times like I think for me, I get a lot of good ideas, like of course right before I go to bed, and then
Gotta write those down.
exactly, and then I forget them by the morning. I'm like really annoyed and pissed off with myself that I didn't write it down. and then other times, like when I have an idea, I'll I'll sometimes this isn't something I'd recommend, but I'll have an idea, and then before I write anything down, I'll let it kind of like fester in my brain for like a couple weeks, and it kind of is a litmus test to see if like it's like, oh, is this a good idea? And if it stays with me, then I'm like, okay, it might be a good idea. If I can't just
Yeah.
like stop thinking about it. But like, do you have the similar kind of like thing?
Yeah, I'm pretty similar, especially with what you just said with that last kind of test.
Yeah,
Um, I do write things down. I used to write things down physically, but then when we moved into the digital age, now I just, do it in my cell phone, probably like a lot of people. Um, but oftentimes I like if there's a line of dialogue or something very specific that I know I'm not going to be able to remember, I will write that sort of thing down. But in terms of large kind of overarching ideas, yeah, I sometimes let them uh, ruminate and gestate before committing them to any sort of written down process, uh, with the hope that if they're good, like you said, they'll stay in my head. And some of my best ideas, I think, I've been letting live up there for years.
yeah,
And if they keep coming back to you, and they keep uh, either coming back to you in their original iteration, or keep developing and getting stronger with, oh, I could add this to it. Something really kind of speaks to
right.
you, just like by the time you're in a writing process and you're writing characters, if you're doing something narrative or whatever, at a certain point the characters start speaking to you. I think it's the same thing with ideas. At a certain point, the good ones are the ones that linger with you. And I think this is a hard business. We get up at all hours of the night to go out to remote locations, and nobody really wants to do any of that. And so
Some people do. They're weirdos.
yeah, some weirdos like to do that. But I,
Vampire.
believe very strongly in, like, I don't, if something, the whole phrase of like, don't become a filmmaker unless you have to. I don't know how much I buy into that, because I don't know what that exactly means. But I will say, I don't want to start a film unless I really see a need to make it. It's really stuck with me. I'm extremely interested in the topic, because, as you know, by the time you get done with the entirety of the process from the inception to releasing the film, you're sick of your own idea.
Oh yeah,
So it better be damn good at the beginning and have
absolutely.
enough there for you to be interested in it, because by the end, you're also going to want to move on to the next new bright and shiny thing.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that yeah, the way I've like phrased it is just to be curious and be curious about like things that aren't like it's hard for a lot of us who are like obviously like cinephiles and we like love movies just in and of itself as like viewers and audience members, but like you do kind of have to be like curious about other things, and you have to be curious about people and characters and how certain people might react or think about certain things, and that's hard to kind of like, and then sometimes it's like topics or like whether it's like a social issue or something, but then again, like you said, you have to be prepared to like like if you make a movie about abortion, you're gonna have to talk about abortion for like the next 2 years as you release this movie, and that can be
Yeah.
a heavy thing obviously to talk about. So you said you write mostly like digitally, just list taking. Do you have any like organization to it? Because this has been a problem for me lately. I feel like I have like Google Docs, I have like notes, and I do have sometimes like scribbles like on paper, and I
Right.
I do just kind of like lose track personally.
Lose track. They're still in your jeans when you accidentally wash them.
Yes, exactly.
Your killer idea that was going to be the next Citizen Kane, and whoops, there it goes. Um, yeah. So the phrase the question again. Sorry.
I mean, do you have any like I always try to like add some structure or organization to that chaos. Do you have any other
Sure.
like tips in the
I,
way that you do it or that
I
works?
mean, right now,
Or is that a futile effort is kind of the thing?
yeah. No, right now, I mean, I do have a Google Doc that lives virtually, um, where I mean, it's separated into not so much ideas, but I might have, they're not even really log lines, but it might be like a brief synopsis followed by if I have some idea of a kind of tone or genre. I'm not really a genre filmmaker, really. Um, most of my stuff is pretty mixed up and mashed together. Um, but if I have some, you need that kind of triggering uh, function. So if there's something about the project that specifically is speaking to me and is the reason why I'm writing it down, oh, I'd like to do uh, a project on, uh, there's a guy that owns a diner. Okay, you can write that down pretty basically. But if
Sure.
there's something very specific about that diner or a customer that comes in that you'd like to see operate within that world, write that very specific detail down because a lot of times it's the if you have an image, oh, I have an image of a hot coffee being sat down on the table. You don't know why that speaks to you. You don't know why it's interesting, but the fact that it's come to you and it's come to you at a very early stage should, or oftentimes does indicate to me at least, that that's something that even if it's subconscious or below the level of my understanding and comprehension at that moment,
Yeah.
I'm going to at least want to be able to go back to my notes and go, oh yeah, there was this coffee mug thing. Why was that interesting? And that might lead to 10 other, pathways to go.
I was going to bring that up before you brought it up about like images in particular. And sometimes like having a little bit of like photography background, I'll definitely like, take images and, save them specifically, like not just like a mental image, but like a digital image, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, which, yeah, can lead down lots of paths. I mean, speaking to our other point too about letting things ruminate, I think a lot of people get hung up uh, on ideas being like this very precious thing, and which I still like am very much like and protective of the idea and these things, but like you do have to trust that they're going to keep coming. And I think that if you actually decide to be a filmmaker and it's kind of like a lifestyle, especially like as a writer, like if you're decide that you're a writer 24/7 because you don't know when that inspiration or that thing is going to pop into your head that you're just going to you know want to put down in some capacity. But like I do think it's a tough balance finding that time where it like sits and you develop it before developing it, because it can get lost. But then sometimes like waiting for the moment to come, like I've had things that have sat around for a while that I did almost kind of dismiss, and then something happened like you know in society or culturally, and that like was the thing that was missing, where I was like, oh, if I incorporate this aspect of real life into
Yeah,
this concept, like it's so much better. And that's I was like, oh, that's what the movie's about, and that's
totally.
the thing. And sometimes that is with like an image and you don't know how to like recreate it, or like what is this actually about, and then this other thing comes later. And yeah, it's
Yeah,
just hard to find like the proper time. But that's why I have multiple things going at once and try and organize in these kind of documents,
for sure.
with log lines, and see uh,
The
what works when.
Absolutely. The I liked what you said about incorporating things as life presents you with like new meaning.
Right.
Um, and I think I live similarly in that um, it's oftentimes counterproductive, I will say, but uh, film is because it is so expensive. Oftentimes, when you have so many moving parts and so many people, there's the desire on the part of everybody involved to go as quickly as possible, to finish it as soon as possible. And oftentimes, I think with the most interesting projects, they are ones that live longer and have the opportunity for life to present new layers to the mix. And
Yeah.
so there'll be oftentimes, speaking specifically of the writing process or the idea process, where, like you said, there'll be I'll get 1/3 of an idea, maybe not even a full there, but just a something. And through the process of just, I especially as I get older, I try to not write until I absolutely have to write. One, because it's agonizing, uh,
Yes, writing
and
is
it is,
torture.
yes, it's a sort of self-inflicted torture. Um, but two, because I don't know enough when I'm starting to write, um, and it's frustrating, yes, um, but it gets better once you kind of accept that fact. When you can accept, okay, um, I'm not supposed to have it all figured out. You can allow for time, space, influence, interactions to come into play. And while this kind of maybe sounds more uh, philosophical or metaphysical than I'm intending it to, it is oftentimes, oh, I was watching that television program and that commercial came on. There was something about that that speaks to this other idea that I had 6 months ago. And once you combine that, boom, you have something. Or I was taking a walk out in the park. It's really important that filmmakers go out and live lives and artists go out and live lives, because that's what ultimately we're trying to do with, or at least that's what I'm in large part trying to do with my films. I guess I can't speak for everybody else, but I want my films to speak to lived life experiences and to, from start to finish, be imbued with a sort of, you know, quality like that.
Like I said, it's just like kind of random neurons firing at different times. But like that kind of is one philosophy, I guess, keeping in that same mentality that I've been thinking about a lot lately with like when talking, like actors talk about this a lot. They talk about like finding truth, right? They talk about truth and characters and stuff like that. I think a lot of directors and writers and filmmakers need to bring that up more in their process, because whether you're writing like a crazy science fiction fantasy movie or like a grounded kind of verite realist thing, ultimately it still has to have this grain of truth that's like relatable to people and means something on a kind of humanistic level. But it's hard to, yeah, like I said, it's just like hard to get that all out at once, and see how it kind of develops. So what I want to ask you, like, so when you actually like sit down to write, this is a cliche kind of question, do you outline your features before or whatever?
What the hell is an outline? Let's ask a basic question. Let's back it up, because I
Okay,
have
this
no
is
idea at this
a
point.
question.
Yeah, like I. So to try to answer your question, uh, have I outlined, done things that in my head were outlines, or in other people's
Yeah.
heads were outlines? Yes. Do I do it with any sort of consistency? No. Do I find that it has any? I mean, sometimes the danger of the outline is that you feel too good about it when you get done.
Yeah.
It's like it becomes the thing, and then sometimes you have to pull back from it, like, wait, that's not the thing. The thing is the actual movie, by way of a script, or at least that's the traditional way. I mean, I have my own.
Well, we've
We can
talked.
get into that, but yeah.
Yeah,
uh,
we've talked about that before, as far as like like Tarantino talks about his script as being like it can be its own thing, like a book, but
sure.
which is a little weird to me, because it's a blueprint ultimately.
Right. And I actually agree with. I can't believe I'm going on the record with this. I actually agree.
Tarantino.
I actually agree a lot with what Tarantino is saying, even though I have significant differences, and we'll leave it at that, with with Tarantino. But in as far as the script is concerned, I think the script is meant. The best scripts are meant as like if they have to inspire you to want to get up at 4 a.m. in the morning, go out to the fields and with a bunch of people and film this crazy thing as the filmmaking gods look down upon you and laugh at, haha, these stupid humans doing this stupid thing out there.
And
Right.
like,
They're breaking your camera left and right. The lunch is late. Everybody's getting the flu, et
yeah,
cetera, et cetera. And so if you don't have a good script or a good beginning sort of place to start,
has to be
why
worth
are
it.
you doing it?
Yeah.
And so going back to your other question about the outline, I guess, is just the pre-script in that it needs to inspire you to write the script. So when I have done outlines in the past, my outlines, they tend to be more detailed than perhaps maybe um, a lot of people's outlines are. It's very hard for me just to do
Hmm.
like bullet points.
Oh.
And so oftentimes I don't really present these outlines to anybody else. They're really just for me because I think if I gave them to other people, uh, they would, there's too much there. And at that stage, I'm oftentimes just, uh, throwing out, I'm compiling what I have up until that point, but it's very uh, jumbled up. It's very unclear even to me. And it begins the process of organizing. Yes, I don't often start writing uh, the script at least until I know the ending, um, because I want to be able to write to something. I find that that is the most essential step of pre-writing, is knowing what the end is or what the end could be or what the end is sort of about. And if outlining something is going to help me to locate that and to know that, that's fine, and that's a good process. If the outlining is if the outlining doesn't end with me knowing what the conclusion of the story, the movie, the film is, then it was a pointless exercise. So, and if I already have the ending in my mind, then a lot of times the outline becomes unnecessary, um, because so it's kind of work to get that question answered for me.
Yeah, I feel like I'm always refining kind of that process, the pre-writing process, whatever you want to call it. But I do definitely have, just to like nitty gritty wise, like I do have Google documents of kind of how I compile stuff. I have like this last one that I've been working on. I actually started. The first thing I wrote down was like more of like a treatment. It was in prose. It was like a short story.
Yeah, I was
Paragraph.
just about to say treatments are actually more beneficial, I find, than what I think most people call outlines.
I think it was, and I think like I kind of basically I stopped after like it was basically just the first act of the movie, and then I was like, it got me excited enough about it and about the idea to jump into the script and kind of do it. When talking to other writers, I I found that a lot of them do like, at least the people in my circles that I talk to do like the outlining process. But I also mentioned to them that I'll start writing without knowing where I'm going necessarily. I mean, it was funny what you said about like endings and stuff because I agree and do that, but not maybe quite as much as you. Like I agree that there's kind of, for me it might be a little bit more of a thematic kind of full circle thing where like, oh, I know where like like what I want to say at the end, but I don't know what necessarily that final spark or hit specifically in the narrative is going to be. And for
Yes.
me, I like that kind of artistic flow in the process once you get in the middle and you're just like, okay, this scene leads into the next scene, and you just really kind of go without having, without having outlined it, just like knowing this is where the characters are going or what would happen next in this scenario is kind of my favorite part of finding that
Yeah.
when writing, which is like sometimes hard to get to. And then, so then what will usually happen is like when I'm lost in Act Two, as you tend to get, I'll then actually go back to that kind of Google document and look at anything kind of in the prose treatment that I wrote out or anything like that, or any other random bullets, and then actually outline the rest of the movie, like the second half of the movie, which is a little weird, but seems to mostly work for me, and that like it just kind of like carries through. And one of the problems I have too is in rewriting. We can get into rewriting, but is like,
I hear that's what writing is.
So, someone said one time, 1,000 times, writing is rewriting. I'll try and catch myself because I know I shouldn't doing the rewriting as you're writing before I get to the end, because in a couple of mine I've been like I could tell I screwed up. I was like, because like the first act will be like great, like greatly written, and then by the end of it it's just like the ending is just not as polished as it should be, and I'm like, oh yeah, I went back 5 times and rewrote already.
Right.
But
a classic problem.
Exactly.
No, so yeah, how you've put it is more articulate than I put it, because in terms of the ending, it's not that I have the airport scene at the end of Casablanca all imagined in my head.
Sure. Yeah.
When I start writing, if only. What I try to do is to have some sort of notion, some sort of feeling, some sort of thematic. And if I do have something more complete, great. There have been projects where I have a very specific, this is what gets me excited about the film. This is how it ends, exactly like this. But yes, I very much like having the feeling, as you're talking about, of exploration in the first draft.
Right.
Almost on the veering into chaos, almost. Like I always say I write away from myself and I direct towards myself. And what I mean by that is I don't want to know everything about what it is I'm writing. I want it to be foreign and strange to even me as much as possible, especially in that first draft.
Yeah.
I want to not be asking questions that typically would fall within the parameters of logic and like all the questions that a money person is going to ask you, likability and
very Charlie Kaufman of you.
Yeah,
spit it out.
Right. Where's the growth in the character and all these sorts of traditional questions, which I already throw up immediately as somebody says them to me anyway. None of those do I want in my head as I'm writing in that particular first draft. And the goal of the first draft in that sense is just to write what is the most clearest, well, not clearest, but the most purest expression of the interior state that I'm in the story is, and let it come to just let it flow as much as possible, like you said. And then when you're directing, I know we're not talking about this yet, the job of the director is to make sense of the writing, but the job of the writer is to write and to make something interesting enough where a director wants to come on and make sense of it. And even if that is the same person and you're taking off one hat and putting on the other, I don't want to get to the directing stage having already knowing all the answers to the questions. I want the writer in me to leave questions, to leave Easter eggs, to leave breadcrumbs for the director in me to then come back and look at the document. And sometimes does that end up with me looking at my own writing and going, who wrote this piece of shit? Yes. But that's a better place to be, in my opinion, than to pick up a piece of writing and go, oh, this is just not interesting. It doesn't stimulate the neurons, as you say, are not firing. So I will say, in terms of outlining your original question, in my second draft, that's where an outline in a more traditional sense might make more sense, where I've put a bunch of stuff down onto a page, and now I can order it, rearrange it, see themes, bring things out of it,
Yeah.
uh, toss things away. That's where something that it would be more traditional, like an outline, could come into play and be of more use. But at the beginning stage, oftentimes what I wind up doing when I start an outline is I basically just start writing, and so it doesn't. I really only do outlines when there's some outside force, outlines proper, outside force or person that would necessitate situation that would necessitate me doing an outline. There's another individual that I'm collaborating with, and we need to have some shared sense of where something is going or what it is.
Do you always write in order? Like do you jump ahead to scenes? And I mean,
I
I
have,
yeah,
but
I mostly write in order, but my again the problem is like again stopping myself from like the rewriting stuff is like I'll come up with a thing like whether it's like it's a Chekhov's gun kind of thing. It's like, oh, they need this thing here, but I have not established that at all. So it's definitely not a linear process all between like, oh, I have to
mhm.
go back and put the gun in the first scene and this, but but that can be tricky. So you don't, or do you do?
How I would answer that is, I think writing is damn hard, and so anything that inspires you to write, do that. So I write what's available to me when I sit down and at my seat, at my computer. I write what is available, what's coming to me. Why waste time thinking this isn't the next thing if you have something else that's available to you, that's coming to you, that you're inspired by?
Yeah.
Start working on that, because that might trigger something, uh, send you retroactively towards something else, and open up new doorways for you. So I typically will write forward until I can't write forward anymore, and then I'll just write what's available to me. Oh, I don't know how I go A B C D E. I don't know how we're going to get to Z, but oh, here's an M. So let me write M right now. And by writing M, if I write a good M,
Then you have a point to get to.
yeah,
Yeah.
you have a point to go to that you can start like moving back towards. And so, um, that's oftentimes what I'm doing, I suppose. I find similarity in what you're saying in terms of writing something over and over again when you're not trying to, drafts. The concept of drafts for writers are always, uh, it's
Yes.
always a difficult one, because you don't know where. I probably write
Messy.
hundreds of drafts, but it's because I've gone back, as you said, and rewritten things over and over and over again. I have a lot of trouble moving through in one pass, stopping it, defining it as a draft, and saying, "Look, I've done a first draft,"
Right.
and then starting a second draft. That hardly ever happens.
It's very stupid how like just the numbering of it and then how you just define it to different people because it's like and especially if you're like showing it to different people at different stages whether it's an actor or whatever it's just like well technically or of course once you're into a shooting script and production and if it's only like one scene that's changed it's a whole nother draft and a whole nother color.
Do
um
you make shooting scripts?
uh
Like,
no, I mean I'll add the numbers on the sides to show the scene.
sure, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'll like scribble, my director's notes on an actual script, but nothing really changes. But also, like, I do think, um, I mean, thinking about like, there's another question I was going to ask you before I asked. Oh, before I get to that, speaking of like revisions, though, just a quick kind of like technical question: do you like make actual full new documents? Do you do you write on File Draft, or do you write on Calcs? Or
Oh, this is actually the question that everybody wants to know. What do you write on?
here's the answer. It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
also just like curious.
I generally, for the last 2 or 3 years, I've been writing in fade in.
Oh, nice.
Um,
Oh,
they better give us money.
brought to you by Faden.
Or Final Draft, or whichever screenwriting company will give
I
us money.
too.
Yeah.
Um,
No, so when I'm starting a new draft, I generally speaking start with a new document,
okay.
and
Like
um,
anything, so
yeah, I'll just start, Dream Project Draft 2.
right. Yeah.
Um,
When you when
and
you when you write those separate scenes, like say it's a scene that happens, in the third act, but you're only still in the first act or whatever. Do you write those in a separate document, or you just write it at the end of the same?
Lately, I have been working on all of my scenes in separate documents and then compiling them. I also, I tend to write more episodic. Like my work tends to be more episodic than maybe is traditionally um,
Mhm.
the norm or whatever, and they tend to be kind of vignette-y anyway.
Mhm.
So oftentimes I don't need as much connective tissue as maybe a more traditional story needs. And so it's easier for me in a way to just have, in my last document, I have 80 scene documents, and those scenes might be as much or as little as, several pages or one sentence,
Mhm.
but I then go back and compile them once I've finished into a one single document.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's kind of what I do. I mean, it's all spread out. I partly asked the what program question is because going back to outlining briefly, I have been playing around more with the Final Draft kind of beat board stuff, which I do like as a more visual
Mhm.
thing where I can really move scenes around and like make like page target counts. Just like okay, I should be up until this point, pretty
Yeah,
soon.
I do want to go back to that what you were talking about with the treatment, because I think that's a point that's lost on a lot of people. Um, the screenplay format, and this also ties into the question of what program you write in. For me, and I think a lot of other people, the screenplay format is a horrible format. It's a horrible format to read. It's a horrible
Yeah.
format to write in. A lot of new writers get caught up on like, oh, I'm not doing the right formatting, and so I'm gonna panic and completely, run and hide under my bed, like because it's a thing that's it. The
Oh, what
screenwriting
about
format,
yeah.
yeah, it thwarts creativity. It decimates your soul, and so the treatment, writing something out as in a prose more akin to short story, novel
Mhm.
sort of way is oftentimes the best way to start, because then you can actually break that down. A screen writing is rewriting, and filmmaking is rewriting. You
Right.
rewrite the idea from your original idea onto the page into a screenplay. Then you rewrite the screenplay during production when you bring in actors and
Yeah.
the camera. Then you rewrite that in editing, in the montage, and then you rewrite that in any other post things that you're adding, special effects, score, et cetera, et cetera. And then if you want to add this, you rewrite it in the marketing of what you've actually done
Yeah.
when you're trying to sell the film. And
Exactly.
so uh, it's important that uh, the only thing that actually matters is the end thing, in terms of what you're calling the film, and how you get there is going to take on a lot of iterations as you go throughout the process. And so don't get hung up on like the screenplay right away, because make the screenplay the way that you want to make it for sure. Don't get hung up on these rules. The rules can come later. But the treatment is highly valuable for getting those ideas out on the page, and everything becomes a lot clearer after you can get that initial step going. I think the juice is flowing.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, because I agree with everything you said. I think one of my favorite books that I've read about, I'm going to say screenwriting, even though it's not about screenwriting, is Stephen King's On Writing, which applies to all writing. I think that it is a skill and it's a muscle that you have to flex, like, and work to get good at. And I think that writing in prose, or writing, even if you're writing like nonfiction or anything else, all these things like help, and it is part of the process, like you said. Another kind of analogy that I've mentioned to other people is, and I think I learned this in college or something, but it just kind of clicked and stuck with me, was when I first learned Photoshop. And one of the main things they talked about was like just the concept of layers. And it's a very like simple, obvious thing, but in any kind of creative process, you're talking about layers, and you're talking about building this thing on top of another thing. And what your initial vision, I mean, I hate that kind of cliche as well, but like, it's never going to be the same. I like to think that any great filmmaker, whether it's like Scorsese or whoever, like understands that, the thing that they write or the thing that they're, doing is going to be a different beast or monster at the end. And there's still no way of like knowing exactly where, what that's going to look like. But that's also kind of what makes it exciting to like evolve over the process and like embrace that while keeping a through line of like, what is the core of the story, of the message, of the characters, whatever. If you can be honest and true to that, and that's kind of the truth thing that I was talking about, you can like find the truth in it. I think some people get hung up with this kind of like director mentality that like you need to know the answer to everything all the time, but like it's kind of bullshit, like, because you like literally can't. Like that's impossible.
And you literally don't.
Yeah,
like people expect you to have the answer, and the secret that I often tell actors and all the collaborators is like, look, I don't know all the answers. I'm not going to bullshit you saying that I have all the answers. What I'm here to do is to help guide the process in terms of finding those answers. Yeah. But
absolutely. I think that the other thing I was going to say in that same, but also like, yeah, it's a collaboration. You want these other people to like add their voices, and I think the best kind of films are ones that are like scaled down to a certain level and like limited, where you think of these new things that you couldn't have planned for, right? And whether it's like, staging of an actor or like some other kind of thing on the set or whatever. But what I was also going to say is like another way to put it is like there's always three stories at play when you're making a film. There's the story of the characters in the film. There's the story of you and your crew making the film and telling the story, which is, comes with all its own things of like, your friendship, and and there are some people who just like that's the thing that they love about filmmaking. It's just the camaraderie and all this, the process and stuff. And that's great.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the experience of the audience and how they interpret it. And you don't have control over that. Like you have control over the first thing and the stories that you're depicting on screen, the character stories. You have some level of control over that. And then same thing with the one of like how you make your story. But like you can't control the audience. It was really nice talking to you, Bradley, as always. Hopefully this provides a good kind of sample of the kind of conversations that we want to have with different Chicago filmmakers, producers, directors, writers, craft service people, composers. And hopefully it leads to more open, frank discussion of the process and a very large kind of diverse group of people and perspectives. So thank you again for joining us, and talk soon.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks, everyone.